All right. Well, we'll have some folks just popping on, but as we go. But again, Carl Blackstone with the Columbia Chamber, and we're delighted that y'all are here with us today. We got a great program for you. A couple of housekeeping things. We've got President Caslen is going to be talking for a little while, and then he's got time for Q&A at the end. So if y'all have questions, feel free to utilize the chat box on the Zoom, and we'll take questions that way. I think we're all getting comfortable doing this. So if you have any questions, you can also raise your hand, but we'll take questions at the end. Let me start off by saying we're doing this a little differently. Everybody's pivoting these days in this. Hope y'all are doing well during the COVID stuff, but we are having to pivot. Usually we are at the Palmetto Club, and we've got a half day for the Leadership Summit, but the LCAA board was gracious enough to let the Chamber and the LCAA partner together on this, and have President Caslen as our keynote speaker. So really appreciate Henry Simons and the LCAA board for helping us with this, as well as our staff at the Chamber. It's been great. So without further ado, let me introduce, y'all know Bob Caslen, president of the University of South Carolina, the 29th president of University of South Carolina. For those, he came on late last summer in August of last year. And I tell you what, I don't blow a whole lot of smoke, President Caslen, but I don't know of a better time to have a former military officer at the helm of the university than right now, as we're dealing with things we've never dealt with before and adapting and overcoming. And I know that's the Marines, but whatever. The military piece is important as right now as we look at what's next. And so he's got a great perspective on leadership. And without further ado, President Caslen, welcome. And thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. I turn the floor over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Carl. It's really a pleasure to be with you all, and I look forward to the conversation. I had not known about your organization all that much, but just to see so many people that are involved and anxious to jump on here, it's just great to be able to be with you all. So I do have some slides. I know you're looking at one slide that says senior level leadership. It's actually my last slide. If we can go all the way to the first slide, that is the title page that talks about thoughts on leadership. And as they're moving in that direction, yeah, all the way up, there you go. As we're moving in that direction, so most of the stories and lessons I'll tell you are a result of my first subtitle as Lieutenant General. I haven't been in the Army for 43 years. And if you're in the Army for 43 years, you're in some type of leadership position. So just leadership by just tough learning and experience is a way you really kind of grow up there. A lot of that has, particularly in this crisis, carried over to the University of South Carolina crisis that we're in right now. And I'll be glad to talk about crisis leadership. In this presentation, which really is focused on leadership, is not so much in talking about the actual crisis that we're in right now and the steps that we at the University of South Carolina have taken up to this particular point. During the question and answer period, if you want to ask me anything about how we got to where we are, how we had to make decisions right up front, why we had to make the decision here recently to open up in the fall, what was behind all of that, and some of the unique aspects of crisis leadership, I'll be glad to get into that as well, and glad to do that. But what I wanted to share with you was two things. The agility in leadership, and I wanted to talk about how to build a team in leadership. How do you build teams, and how are you a member of a team, and how does that work? So if I can go to the next slide a little bit, if I could please. This is really something that I think is really important to me over the years, and that is, as a leader, do you have the agility to be able to know where an opportunity exists and then to quickly move there to take advantage of it? So I like to think of it from an intellectual perspective. Do you intellectually recognize where opportunity exists, and can you move in that direction? Physically, as commanding large or leading large organizations, can you move a large organization to that direction quickly? So as you look at agility and leadership, I went to Google and inquired what how Google defined agility, and they defined it as the ability to move quickly and easily, and the ability to think and understand quickly. That makes a lot of sense, and I can resonate with that. So I just kind of put a little twist to it. That's what you see Caslen's definition, and that really is the ability to recognize opportunity and move to take advantage of it. And this is important too. And when opportunity is not there, the ability to create it. So I'd like to tell you a story about this guy named Dave Hodney. That's the example there, which I thought was some of the best intellectual agility and moving in that direction that I had ever seen. So back in the surge during Iraq, you might have remembered the surge where they increased the size of the forces over there back in 2007 and 8 timeframe. I was one of the division commanders in the North, commanding about 25,000 soldiers. And I had responsibility for Northern Iraq, which include all of where Saddam used to live. And it was in the middle of the Sunni Shia confrontation that was in that particular area, this intersectional sect, SECT issues that were going on at that particular point. Issues with regard to the Sunni sect between moderates and radical. And then you had the Kurd Arab issue. So it was really a hugely complex area. You might have remember a time in the city of Samarra, where Samarra was a Sunni city, but they had a very holy mosque in there that was a Shia mosque. So you had this conflict between sects, the Sunnis and the Shia. And there was a guy named Zarqawi who was a radical Sunni who wanted to bring the fight towards the Shia, to submit the Shia to leadership by the Sunni. And he wanted to get that fight going. So what he did is he took that mosque and blew it up. That caused all kinds of sectarian strife between Sunnis and Shias. And we as Americans were just smack in the middle of it. And it became a hugely hostile area. One of the cities outside of Samarra is called Balad. And in Balad was one of my battalion commanders, commanded about a 650 to 800 person force at that point. And it was a very hostile area when we moved in there. So the battalion commander says, how do I get control of this area? How do I get the insurgency removed? How do I gain legitimacy for the government and legitimacy for their economic interests? And so he came up with this great idea based on his interpersonal relationships. He found 2 wealthy Iraqis, and because of his relationship, was able to convince them to pull their money together to create a bank. So banks didn't exist in Saddam's time frame. So these 2 guys really trusted Dave Hodney to pull their money and to create a bank and start lending it out. Well, there was this old dilapidated tomato paste factory that was no longer operational, and they took a loan from this new bank that was created to get the tomato paste factory up and running again. And as soon as they got that thing up and running again, all the farmers in the area, and farming was a very important part of the economic sector, who hadn't been farming for a number of years, wanted to start farming again because they had a market in which they can grow tomatoes and bring the tomatoes to. So if you're going to farm in Iraq, what you have to do is you have to get, it's all arid, so you got to get, it's all part of irrigation, which means you got to get the water out of the Tigris River into the canals. The water flows through the canals, out of the canals into the fields. So the canals are all busted and they were all full of silt and they all needed repair. And then all of the pump mechanisms were all driven by electricity, and the electrical grid was inoperative. So the farmers, because they wanted to farm again, because now they had a demand to bring the tomatoes to, decided to put pressure on the local government to repair the canals and to get the electrical grid up and running again. And the government responded. So in an insurgency, it's incredibly important when the government responds and provides the essential services to the people, because if they can provide essential services, then the people's loyalty goes towards that government rather than the loyalty to the insurgency. And it's one of those key elements in a counterinsurgency fight that has to take place. So all of a sudden, the government became responsive. They got the canals fixed. They got the water flowing again. They started growing tomatoes, and they started growing them like crazy. And then they were putting them in buckets and bringing them in the back of their pickup trucks, and they're driving out to the tomato paste factory. And all the trucks were all lined up on the highway, waiting to drop off their tomatoes, and they were plugging up the highway. The tomato paste factory just happened to be right along the main highway between Baghdad and Mosul, and it created a huge traffic jam. So people started complaining. So some entrepreneur Iraqi said, I fixed this problem. So he plowed out a field and created a parking lot. So all the trucks now were sitting in a parking lot. And then all the drivers were hungry and they were tired. And another entrepreneurial Iraqi said, he started getting a fruit stand and a food stand, which turned into a restaurant. And then, believe it or not, another one built a place where they can go to sleep at night, like a small miniature motel. And the next thing you know, all these other businesses started spinning out of it, like cans, how to make cans and how to make labels for cans. And the next thing you know, Samra and Balad became one of the quietest areas in all of Iraq. And without firing a single shot, this battalion commander realized what was the natural hierarchy of order, where do you press in order to get consequences, how do you understand what those consequences are to the second to the third order effects, and then how do you manage relationships with people in order to drive your mission in that direction. And it's a great example, I thought, of intellectual agility that Dave Hodney had, the interpersonal relationships, and then he was able to drive the results so that he was able to bring peace to the area that was once hostile in a very different sort of way. And I just think it's a great example of agility. And so anyway, when you as a leader, whether you're leading at the local level or leading at the strategic level, can you recognize where opportunity exists? And you have the intellectual agility not only to recognize it, but to move your organization in that direction to take advantage of it. Now, Hodney didn't realize this was an opportunity. So it was an issue for him of not necessarily recognizing the opportunity, but he knew that if he went in this direction, he would create the opportunity. And it was just kind of a fascinating way to see all that come together. So I pass it on as an example. So if I can go to the next slide. So I know most of you, I want to talk a little bit about a profession and then get into a little bit some examples of all this. I want to talk a little bit about a profession. So we're in the profession of higher education. I came from the profession of arms. Some of you are lawyers and doctors in the profession of health and education and other professions as well. But there's some things that are unique about a profession. And the first thing about the uniqueness of profession is that you have a unique expertise. You are an expert at something. You are competent in what you're doing. And the second thing about a profession is that you have a client and you have a unique relationship with that client. And that relationship is a relationship that's built on trust. So in the profession of arms, for example, our unique expertise is the ability to use lethal force in a ethical manner in order to accomplish national security objectives. That's the unique expertise. And what's really unique about it is that in the profession of arms, you're willing to give your life for that purpose. In the profession of higher education, our expertise is the ability to deliver education to standards and levels of integrity, in our case as a flagship, principally to serve the people of South Carolina. And then we have to be competent in that, or no one's going to want to come to this institution. Our client in the profession of higher education are the people of South Carolina as the flagship and our students. We also take students that are not out-of-state students, that are not in-state students that come from other states, and they become part of our family and they become our client as well. But as a flagship, we principally serve the people of South Carolina. This is a relationship that's built on trust. And Stephen Covey wrote a great book called The Speed of Trust. And in the book, The Speed of Trust, he says, trust is tremendously important because when you have an organization where people really trust each other, it can move in lightning speed. And he said, well, how do you create trust? And trust is really a function of what he called being competent and being men and women of character. So competence, if I'm going to be a subordinate to you, I'm going to want to be able to trust you because I know that you know what you're doing, that you have tremendous competence, you're an expert in your field of whatever career you're in. And at the same time, I'm going to trust you if I know that you live by a set of values that are embracing a that embrace those values, that creates a culture where I feel not only good about myself, but I understand what the parameters of acceptable and not acceptable behavior are within that climate, within that culture. And that really defines the character of the institution, which is really driven by the character of the leadership. Now, what's more important, competence or character? And the answer is character will swallow competence every single day. You could be number one in your class and be a tremendously competent person academically, but if you fail in character, you have failed in leadership. And you know, all you have to do is just look on the military side and military examples of great leaders, the David Petraeuses and people like that, who were tremendously competent, but they had a breach of character in their life in some way, and you know, the wall came tumbling down. So that's why trust is really a function of competence and character. And character is really nothing more than the values that you embrace, and that those values are internalized, so they become part of your very essence. So that when you're faced with a compromising situation, you don't necessarily have to think about what right or wrong is. The natural reaction in any time you're compromised will be the manifestation of the values that you have internalized that progress up. I like to think of it as I'm holding a cup of coffee. And as I hold that cup of coffee that's filled to the top, if someone bumps my elbow, whether I want to or not, what's inside that cup's going to spill out. If someone bumps me the wrong way, whether I want to or not, the initial reaction that I manifest is going to be what the values I've internalized. If you want to see what values are really consistent in your life, go find yourself in a compromising situation and see how you reacted. And that's the true test of what values that really are defining you at any particular time. I like to think of a set of values that I've lived by in my life, which are listed on that slide there: values of loyalty and duty and respect and selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. There's all kinds of other values that are out there that you can embrace. A lot of your values, which define your character, are really not only just values of virtue, but they're also values of resilience, values of perseverance, values of courage, values that drive you to physically and mentally to a certain end state. Those are also those values. But whatever values you as a profession or you as a person within that profession embrace, those are the ones that will define what your character is like. The other thing that's very important about a profession is this issue of stewardship. And the reason I say it's so tremendously important is that it's important that we within a profession hold ourselves accountable. Because if we fail to hold ourselves accountable, you're going to have a degradation of performance. And if you fail to hold that degradation accountable, that now becomes the new standard. And then if you fail, and if that particular standard, now lower, drops, then guess what happens? And if it's not held accountable, now you have another degradation of standards. And then when you have this degradation of standards over time, you have the unraveling of what the most important element of character is, and that's this discipline, because discipline is the glue that really holds it together. What's unique about professions is that the people within that profession hold each other accountable. There doesn't have to be an outside element or an outside force. Just think about the profession of arms and how they try to hold themselves accountable. And if they don't, Congress will get involved, and you're going to have all kinds of congressional inquiries and things like that. But before you get to that level, the best thing you want to do is you hold yourselves accountable, and that's the stewardship of it. All right, so with that background on the issue of leading an agile team and leading in a profession, I want to go to what I think are the top 10 elements of a profession. If I can go to the next slide. So I just, you know, everybody has their own things that are important to them. If I had to say, over my 43 years in the military and the 2 years since then, if I think about what's most important in leadership, I would say these are the 10 most important things. I really don't have time to get into them all. I want to go through a couple of them. So I really want to talk about the three teams, and then I'm going to just kind of stop right there and open up to questions. But what's most important? Number one, what's the most important is character. If you fail in character, you fail in leadership. Matter of fact, with a friend of mine, a colleague from West Point, one of our professors up there, we actually just finished writing a book called The Character Edge, Leading and Winning with Integrity. and it's going to come out in the fall. And but it really is all about character. It's about the element of character and leadership. And quite frankly, I just think character becomes the most important element in leadership, and that's why I just put it number one. If you fail in character, you fail in leadership, and whatever we do, we want to build leaders of character, because that is, in the end, the most important thing that we can be doing. The second one is purpose, to live a pervasive purpose life, to lead a life that drives us into understanding where we want to go, that we will not negotiate the price to get there, that we understand what that purpose is. And the unique thing about purpose is that if you really want to motivate subordinates, you don't motivate subordinates by telling them what to do. You motivate subordinates by getting their buy-in to the end state, creating the vision so that they understand where the end state is, creating that vision and understanding the purpose behind the vision so it becomes their purpose. So the greatest leaders are ones that not necessarily tell people what to do, but the greatest leaders are ones who can really articulate a purpose to get the buy-in of that purpose so that subordinates take ownership of that purpose as if it was their own. And when people have ownership of a purpose in that particular organization, then they're self-motivated. You don't necessarily have to tell them what to do. They're going to be motivated what to do. So the best leaders, particularly at the strategic level, will be able to create the vision, articulate the vision, make sure you have a mission statement that can accomplish that vision, and that people understand the tasks that are necessary to accomplish the mission and its purpose. And when they understand the purpose, then the next level is that they get buy-in of the purpose. And once they have buy-in in the purpose, then they're motivated, self-motivated to get there. When in leadership positions, you're going to find yourself consumed. You're going to find yourself consumed in work, and you're going to find yourself consumed in work when you get home on weekends and at nights. And in the military, not only do you find yourself consumed with so much work, but you find yourself on these deployments and training exercises that take you away from your family and things like that. What happens is you have this cycle of success. So I remember when I was a brand new, just graduated from West Point, went in the Army, I was a brand new lieutenant, low level, little bit of responsibility, but I found myself successful, and it really whetted my appetite. And I got excited about what I was doing, so I wanted to do some more. So they promoted me and made me a first lieutenant and gave me another job, another responsibility. And I was successful in that. And it was this cycle of they give you a new job and you're successful in it. They give you a new job and you're successful in it. They give you a new job and you're successful in it. But every new job that you get was an increase in duty and responsibility. And the increase in duty and responsibility creates this dynamic of more time and energy to meet the increasing demands of duty and responsibility. So who is the bill payer for time and energy? Well, the bill payer is the other aspect of your life, whatever that is. And I can't begin to tell you how many times in my life that I had friends when I was a young lieutenant, and we were friends, my wife and I were friends with their families, that over the years, something happened in their lives where they were out of balance, and very close friends that we had were no longer, something happened to their marriage, something happened to their family that it was broken apart. Our heart goes out to them, but and I always try to counsel or mentor and work with them, and a lot of times it was the imbalance that was created in their life. So I believe no matter what level you arise to, there's got to be a balance in your life between family and work and community. And what is that right balance? Only you will know, and a lot depends on the chemistry of your relationships with your family. But when you're on your deathbed, I'll guarantee you're not going to wish you spent more time in the office. You're going to wish you spent more time with that family. And the way kids are raised today, that just because you're the mom or you're the dad doesn't mean that they're going to listen to you. In some capacity, you as mom and dad have got to really earn. You've got to earn not the respect, but you got to earn the trust of your children, so that when they come to you with a problem, when they come to you for advice, that they really love and trust you. And it's not something that is there by demand. It's something that because of the relationship you establish, you have earned the right to be of influence in their life. There's going to be times when you have to work late, but not all the time. There's going to be times when you have to go on a trip and a long trip, but not all the times. There's going to be times when you have to go off for a year at a time, at least in the military, but not all the time. But I always say when it's not all the time, then leave the office early, go home, sit down, have dinner with your family, sit down with a cup of coffee, listen to your spouse and how his or her day went that day. And just sit there and listen and just nurture those relationships. When it comes time to put your kids to bed at night, tuck them in, put them to bed, read them a bedtime story. So the last thing they remember is their mom or dad sitting there before they nod off and go to sleep. Because like I said, when you're on your deathbed, you're not going to wish you spent more time in the office. So seek balance in your life if you can. Okay, I'm going to go to number 4 on teamwork, and I'm going to pretty much stop there. This is going to take a little bit of time. But I really look at leadership as being a member of 3 teams. And if I can go to the next slide, please. The first one is the team that you are leading. The second one is the teammates of which you are a part of. And the third is that the fundamental lesson in leadership is first to learn how to follow, not learn how to lead, but learn how to follow. And frankly, in almost every leadership position you'll be in, you're still going to be working for somebody else. So there's this really magic of being a dynamic follower and being a great follower in your boss's team. So let me just kind of walk you through the 3 of these. So if you want to be a great leader, in my opinion, you want to get people to feel comfortable at performing to the upper level of their potential, where you as a leader underwrite the mistakes that they're going to make as opportunities to learn. And because they're learning and growing, they feel good about themselves and the climate that you created. And they understand the vision and they understand the purpose, they have ownership in it, and they're thoroughbred horses moving forward. So how do you get there? It's a great question. So I'll share a story with you. So I had a great Army assignment one time where I was the evaluator of Army units that would go through a very rough training exercise. And they were in this training exercise, it was what they called force on force. They had a opposing force and they had the friendly force. And my job was to evaluate and be the mentor of the senior leader of the friendly force. And it was free play. It was all laser guns, so if the laser hit you, you were taken out and all that sort of thing. But it was a laboratory of leadership. And I loved that job immensely because I learned so much about leadership. And frankly, any inflated opinion I had about myself and leadership, I saw some great leaders, and God had really given some great leaders out there, some tremendous talent. But what was important about what I saw was how a leader had an impact on the climate they created within their organization. And as a result of the climate that leader created, how that organization was able to really perform to levels they had never thought of. So I remember you would know right away whether or not it was going to be a great rotation or whether it was going to be terrible. And on those great rotations, when I first walked into their headquarters, there was always a buzz of activity. There were people running around, they were talking. Matter of fact, the younger staff members were talking to the more senior staff members. The more senior staff members would stop and listen to them. There was formal information flowing. There was informal information. And when it came time to brief the boss at the end of the day, they called it a battle update briefing. You knew exactly why it was such a great organization. And the answer was quite simply, when they briefed the boss edified, lifted them up, and made them feel good about themselves and the work that they were doing. And staff members were crawling over each other because they wanted to show off their stuff. They wanted to be the one to brief their boss, because whenever they briefed the boss lifted them up and edified them. And the key, though, was what the boss was able to do was he made them feel good about themselves. Notice the difference. He didn't necessarily make them feel good about the boss. The boss created a climate that made them feel good about themselves because they were given duties, they were given responsibilities of which was forcing them to grow. They were given the resources, they accomplished their tasks, and they felt good about themselves. And he created that climate. The most important thing the boss did was underwrite risk, because if you want someone to really grow, they got to get to that part of their performance where they're performing to the upper level of their potential. Let's just pretend that their performance is on a bell-shaped curve. Sometimes it's less than standard, in the middle is standard, and the bell-shaped curve comes down here. Sometimes it's right to standard. So if I want someone to perform to the upper level of their potential, I want them to perform to the upper level of that curve where they don't have a lot of experience, that part of the curve where they're uncomfortable, because that's where I want them to start operating in. And because they're into areas that they're uncomfortable and they have less experience for, there's likely to make mistakes. And here's what the boss has to do. The boss has to get them in there, operate in that area, and not to see a mistake as something that's bad, but to see the mistake as an opportunity to grow. Because if you take a bone and you break the bone, and the bone heals and heals correctly, the bone is stronger where the break occurred if it healed correctly than it was before the break. Just like someone who's out there and operating in an area they're uncomfortable with, if they make a mistake and that they learn from their mistake, they're going to become better, they're going to become stronger, they're going to feel good about themselves, they're going to learn something. But the boss has to underwrite the risk and give them the freedom to make mistakes. And I think that's what's important. You want people to exercise initiative so that they feel that they're value added, that they're a valued member of the organization, that you create the climate that allows them to do that. And what's really important is you gotta learn how to handle bad news and be patient and calm about it. And I'd walk into some headquarters and you knew right away it was awry and it was cold. And you sat down and walked around the headquarters and people are sitting behind their computer screen. They're not getting up. They're not talking to anybody else. They're doing only exactly what they're told to do, nothing more. And when it came time to brief the boss at the end of the day, you knew exactly why. Nobody wanted to brief the boss. So only the senior staff member was the one to brief the boss. And because the senior staff member was the only one to brief the boss would just, the staff would brief him, the boss would just rip them apart. And he would rip them apart in a public forum, embarrass them in front of their peers, and nobody else would ever do anything that was going to put themselves in such a compromising situation. And so what you had as a result is you had staff members and subordinate leaders that were doing only what they were told to do, nothing more, nothing less. They would not get out of their comfort zone to save their life, because they knew if they did and they made a mistake, they're going to be chopped off at the knees and publicly embarrassed in front of their peers. So that organization just existed only on what the boss told it to do. It did not capture the initiative, the talents of the subordinates, because all the subordinates did was only exactly what they were told to do. It's a significantly important difference on a command climate that the boss creates for units that really blossom and really have great innovation and insights and are really allowed to grow, because the boss gets people to operate in that area that they're uncomfortable with so that they can learn and stretch and grow. And when they grow, the organization grows with them. And it's just kind of one of the things about being a great leader and building an organization that really prospers and grows. The second team is that you're a teammate with your fellow teams. And this is really interesting because, in the military organization, so if I'm a brigade commander, I have about 5 battalions, subordinate units. And each one of those subordinate units has a leader who is very competent and usually has a huge ego as well. So I would just try to watch very carefully how those leaders got along with each other and what kind of a teammate that they created with each other. Because if they couldn't get along with each other, or if one of the teammates was criticizing or ridiculing the other one behind their back, it just creates a very sour atmosphere. And I wouldn't tolerate it. I would just say to my subordinate commanders, I don't care how strong or how good you are. If you can't get along with your fellow teammate, then you have a character issue that, frankly, in my opinion, you're not going to get promoted again, or this is going to be the last command that you'll see. And really, this relationship between teammates, looking after each other, working well together, covering your backside, covering your flank, being able to crosstalk and help each other, really shows an element of one's character of being selfless and supporting of each other rather than just being focused on yourself. I can tell you lots of stories about a lot of different commanders, names that you would even recognize, where I saw this go awry, but we'll save that for another time. Let me finish up here real quick, and then I'm going to open it up to questions. The third one, though, is tremendously important, and that is being a dynamic follower. So West Point is to produce leaders, but the first thing they do at West Point is they throw you into what they call beast barracks. They strip you down, they take away all your clothes, they put you in the same clothes, they take away your entire identity, they just create some miserable conditions, and they really want to see who's going to survive out of that thing, and they teach you how to follow. Matter of fact, they say you only have 4 answers whenever you're asked a question. Yes, sir, no, sir, no, sir, I do not understand, and no excuse, sir. And it's really kind of a miserable situation that they put you in. But the first lesson of leadership is to learn how to follow. And the first element to follow is yes, no, I do not understand, no excuse. And where we mess up, in my opinion, is the no excuse. We as leaders fail to take responsibility of our actions. So the most important element of leadership is first learn how to follow. And I don't care if you're the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States military, you answer to one person, that's the commander-in-chief. Even though you're in charge of the entire military, you still have to answer to the commander-in-chief. You're still a follower. So what does being a good follower mean? And this is what I call being a dynamic follower. And the best way I can answer this, I'm going to give you another story. The same assignment I was with, and it was time to evaluate the organization as they came up with their plan of operations. And then what happened was the staff would work on the plan of operations. They would work throughout the night. They were tired, felt miserable. They put their blood, sweat, and tears, their heart and soul into the plan. They owned that plan. They became so emotionally tied to it that this was the plan we have to convince the boss to do. And the boss, on the other hand, got plenty of sleep, walked around the organization, talked to the workers, talked to the ones in senior leadership, talked to people outside the organization, got good perspectives, clear head, plenty of sleep, and it came time to brief the boss on the plan that the staff had recommended and developed. And it was an interesting dynamic, just watching the emotion versus, this common sense, clear thinking boss. So the staff would brief the boss, and they would say, here's the recommended course of action. The boss would answer and say, well, what about this? And what about this? And then the staff would defend it because they were so emotionally tied to it. And the boss would say, what about this? And let me see another course of action. And they were offended because the boss would ask for another course of action. They said, no, boss, this is the way it's got to be. I got my life and my blood, sweat, and tears committed to this particular plan. You've got to support it. And the boss would say, no, I think we ought to go slightly over here. And then something magical has happened during this exchange. It's what I call going from phase 1 to phase 2. And the subordinates, as followers, really have to understand the boss when the boss is in a phase 1 and when that transition has turned and the boss is in phase 2. And phase 1 leadership is where I want your subject matter expertise, where I want your recommendation, where I want your opinion, where I want your candor. Candor is tremendously important, speaking truth to power. And I want that information, and the boss actively seeks it and listens. Very important dynamic between the staff and the boss at that point. But that's phase 1, the listening and the development of understanding. And then the boss all of a sudden transitions from phase 1 to phase 2. And phase 2 is now the boss has made a decision. As long as it's a moral ethical decision, what does the boss now expect from subordinates? The boss now expects the subordinate to take ownership of that decision as if it was your own and execute with minimum guidance. What does the boss expect in phase 1? The boss expects somebody who has great understanding, who is very informative and explains things. The boss wants to listen, gives subject matter expertise, and a strong recommendation. with candor. That's what the boss wants in phase one. What does the boss want in phase two? In phase two, the boss has made a decision, wants understanding, and wants execution as though they owned it with minimum guidance and intent. That's what the boss is looking for. What happens with the staff? The staff who has poured their heart and soul into it, into this recommended course of action, and the boss listened. That's all well and good, but then the boss made a decision. If the staff did not necessarily agree with that decision, as long as it's moral and ethical, what is the staff's reaction? Does the staff make the transition from phase one to phase two? Or does the staff, still committed to their recommendation, even though the boss didn't take it, leaves the room, complains, whines and moans about it, and then undermines the credibility and the authority of the boss because they were so emotionally tied to a recommendation that the boss went into another direction? And what does the boss want? The boss wants a dynamic follower that recognizes the transition from phase one to phase two. And then the boss wants someone who understands guidance, understands intent, is able to execute, like a thoroughbred horse. What you want is you want a thoroughbred horse. They understand where they got to go, and all you do is just point them in that direction, and they take off. And then how do you steer a horse when you have a thoroughbred horse? You don't get in front, you're going to get run over. You don't get in, push them in the back because they're going to kick in the teeth. You just kind of tap them a little bit on the side of the neck, and they move in that direction. And that's what you're looking for in the subordinate in phase two. And that's what it means to be a dynamic follower. All right. Let me just kind of go one last thing here. If I can go to the next slide, the man in the arena. And then if I can go to the slide after that. So whenever you're a leader, you're going to stick your head above the crowd. And whenever you stick your head above the crowd, there's going to be people throwing tomatoes at you. And in the job I'm in right now, man, there's been no shortage of tomatoes being thrown at me, but that's all right. Because I love this quote. It's not the critical, and I've kind of made a little bit of a change from Teddy Roosevelt when he wrote this thing way back in the 1940s, but I made a little bit of a change and I made it gender neutral. So forgive me for changing what he wrote here, but I think it's important. It's not the critic who counts, nor the man or woman who points out how the strong one stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man and the woman who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, but comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasm, the great devotions, who spends himself or herself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he or she fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his or her place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. So stick your head above the crowd. Don't worry about it. There's going to be tomatoes thrown at you, but that comes with the turf. That's what leaders are made for. And then do good. Take care of your people. Okay, I'm going to stop there. There's a lot more I can talk to you about. I'm going to stop there, and we can take the rest for another time, but I'm going to open up to questions. So, Carl, back to you for any questions that you want to send my way.
Great. Thank you very, very much. Feel free to, if y'all have questions, to put in the chat box. I'll happy to moderate because I think everybody's still on mute, but if you could put in your question. I got a question for you, just to bring it back to where you are now. I mean, obviously the military has taught you to look at things and make decisions and act on them and make sure the information is correct. Can you talk about your process that you bring to the university, and more importantly, especially during the COVID, what you analyze, what was your thought process? Not question the decision, but just what went into you making the decision to close and so quickly, and then throwing that to the fall as well on opening back up.
So there's a lot that goes with this. Well, first of all, you have to think strategically. And as you look out the landscape, there are some issues out there, some obstacles that may be coming your way or maybe not. So as the virus was growing, not only in Asia, but also on the West Coast, and then in Europe on the other side of us, you knew without a doubt eventually it's going to come where you are. We knew that our students, all 32,000 of them, were spread across the world. Not just South Carolina, but across the world for spring break. And they were going to come in contact with this and they were going to bring it back. So what was the possibility of that could happen? So the first thing we did is when we realized that we had a potential issue, and the other thing that drove it was the Princess Diamond cruise ship, because the Princess Diamond cruise ship had, I think, 2,000 tourists on it, and 700 of them contracted the virus. And people were saying that a college campus has the same sort of contact between people that you can see on a cruise ship. So we would create a similar sort of scenario. So, so I asked the staff right up front. I said, we had to take a look at this and come back. And we were very fortunate to have in the Arnold School of Public Health some scientists who are epidemiologists who really were able to help us understand the modeling of a pandemic and where the international model was, how it was going to impact the United States, and then particularly where we were, how it was going to impact us when students return. And we realized this is nothing more than intelligence. This is nothing more than trying to understand the problems that you have and understand how they will develop over time. And then where are you with respect to this challenge that you're trying to address over time? And we realized that we were at risk. That's where we had to make the decision to at least extend spring break by a week. That was the first one, and then go online by 2 weeks. And then we had to make the decision to go online to the end of the semester, and then we had to make the decision to go online all the way to the to the end of the summer. So, and it was really driven by the understanding of how the virus would have spread in our particular area, and that was the thing. I'll tell you, I was very nervous about making that decision, and I was not in favor of doing it. But I had a great staff, led by a great chief of staff, and the staff was able to really understand how this situation, this problem, this virus was going to develop, to be able to articulate and model it, and to be able to articulate how it would impact us. And the other thing that was important is that the staff did a great job helping me understand principles that were going to guide this decision. Principle number one was the health and welfare of our students, faculty, and staff. Principle number two is, because we're an urban environment, was to mitigate any spread of the virus into the local community. Because it's not just our students, because our students are of the age group where it's not going to impact them, statistically anyway, in large numbers or dramatic numbers, as it would some other very vulnerable groups that are out there, particularly in the city of Columbia. So we wanted to do that. And then we had to look at, can we deliver education to the standards and to the integrity that our students expect and what's expected of us at this university? And what are the overall impacts to this institution, and how do we mitigate them? So those were our 4 principles that we put together, and that guided our decision making through the entire time. This evolves, and it's important to understand how it evolves, because once you make a decision doesn't mean that you're stuck with that. You really have got to look at your planning assumptions, look at the threat, in this case the virus, and how it is changing. And you have to modify your planning assumptions as the threat changes over time. And that's what we had to. And then there are actions and reactions and counteractions. And as you look at actions and reactions and counteractions and study them, this is part of the changing environment. And it's important for you to understand that change, which led us, by understanding that change, to finally make the decision to reopen. And not that we had to make the decision first or anything like that. I absolutely didn't want to. I'd love to maximize my flexibility as the president, but I felt it was so necessary to make this decision right up front, because what we saw was an issue and a problem that became more significant than some of the other things that we're dealing with. And that was the vacation. I mean, students were vacating higher education in increasingly higher numbers. And I think that was an issue to the institution of higher education, not just here in South Carolina, but our nation. And if we are going to deliver higher education to them, contrary to the standards and what they view that they expect, that they're going to vote with their feet and do something different. And then it's not just the impact on us with less tuition or less enrollment. It's the impact on the institution of higher education and the preparing of future leaders of our country in alternative ways other than higher education. and because we're advocates of higher education, the importance of higher education, for individual people's lives and for the economy of the community that we're in as well.
Wow. Thank you for that. That's a good answer. A couple of comments let me share with you. John Andos's great presentation. Can you share your PowerPoint slides? John, we're actually going to be posting this on our website, and the slides will be there as well. So go columbiachamber.com, and we will have this on there. So thank you for that. Jamie, thanks for your time. Are smaller technical or community colleges leaders looking to you for reopening advice? I'm sure CHE and all of y'all are talking. What are you getting feedback from other universities, other colleges?
Yeah, the Commission of Higher Education with Dr. Mulholland gets all the presidents together on Monday morning for about an hour or so, and we've been doing that for the last couple of months. And we've been sharing our thoughts and some of the issues and how we're addressing some of those issues. We have the Arnold School of Public Health with our epidemiologists, and we actually gave a presentation to all the presidents about some of the modeling as we see it and how it ought to change over time. And so those are the type of things that we've contributed. And we've also brought, in our planning session, we created a future planning group, really that addresses not only the epidemiology, but the health aspects, the academic aspects, the student life aspects, and the financial aspects and athletic piece of it. So we have representation that really brings all of that together. We call it a future planning group. And we've invited some of the presidents to participate in our future planning group as well. So we're an open book and willing to share as much information as we can. But one of the things that the presidents recognize is that, you know, as a flagship sitting as an urban campus in the middle of the city of Columbia is unique. And there's not many other of the campuses in the state that are similar. You know, they're not urban campuses sitting in the middle of a large city like we are. This creates, and we have 45% of our student population out of state. So this really creates a unique aspect of us, not to our advantage, unfortunately, you know, because of the demographics of where we are, geography-wise, where we are in the middle of an urban campus.
Yeah.
So that means they can make decisions separate from where we're going, you know, which is fine.
Right. A couple of quick questions on that note. I know Ted Creech has a question, but I know the business school has offered up help for small businesses in Columbia. But Ted asks, USC holds a tremendous brain trust across many disciplines. How are you bringing that brain trust to bear to help our larger community and state? What else might you be able to do?
Well, we're doing a lot of work on the medical side. We have our pharmacists, our doctors. We're working with Prisma. We're working with MUSC. We're working with Clemson on some of the medical opportunities that are out there. We're looking at some of the future drugs. We're actually doing some testing right now with some of the future drugs and trying to get some of them because of the testing that we're doing right here in South Carolina in some areas. There's a lot of different aspects that they're working on in that regard. Early on, we were using 3D printers for face masks when we had the face mask shortage. We were also using 3D printers for ventilators because we had this contraption that created out of one ventilator machine, you had this adapter that actually pushed oxygen out in 4 separate ventilators rather than one. So one ventilator was converted to 4 because of this contraption that we were able to make. And we made it on a 3D printer and things like that. And then we have the business efforts that you had referred to as well. And I'm sure there are other work that's going on as a brain trust in the flagship university in support of the other, or in support of the community as well. We're doing other things like we made if there was going to be a hospital overage of patients, we had one of our practice stadiums was all available for them. We had already prepared it so that if you had to bring patients into our area, we would do that. In our arena, the General Assembly's meeting so they can get the social distances. We made our arena available for the Accelerate SC. They're using our Alumni Center for that. All this is no charge whatsoever, so it's all in support of the community.
Great, thank you. A couple other quick questions. I know we're short on time, but Alan Brown, President Caslen, thank you for your service. Will you share with us how or where you learned the concept of underwriting your subordinates' mistakes?
It's just leadership lessons you learn overall in the Army, So, you get in these opportunities where you can really work for great people, and you get in these opportunities where you work for people that are not like that. So you could learn as much from someone that is not a great leader as you can from a great leader. It's kind of a reflection on myself. Like I said, when I got in that one job where I was an evaluator, any inflated opinion I had of myself and my leadership ability was quickly deflated because I saw really God-given talent, incredible talent. And, but I've really learned. So any job that I was in, and the jobs that I felt that I performed the best and that I learned the most from were jobs where bosses were pushing me into areas that I was really uncomfortable with. It's amazing. When, I could tell you story after story after story. Desert Storm story. I remember my boss in Desert Storm said, "I'm taking a day off." And then in the middle of a fight, he goes, "And you're in charge." And I go, "Whoa, man." So now I'm in charge. Yeah. Totally unprepared for that. But he put me out there purposely to develop me. And he knew I was going to screw up and make mistakes, but he didn't care. He just he knew that those mistakes were not going to be life-threatening and things of that sort. So he said, "Caslen, you're in charge. I want you to take advantage of this opportunity and develop." And I really learned, if you really want to develop somebody, put them into an area where they're uncomfortable and let them thrive in that area. Let them learn. They take all of their lessons of leadership and now they can apply them in those really uncomfortable situations. And then that's where really great growth, that's where exponential growth occurs. So you get that exponential learning and experience in those really uncomfortable areas. And that's where really growth occurs. So I just learned that if you're going to create that sort of scenario where people thrive in those areas, because that's, you really don't want to get in there because it's uncomfortable, you're going to screw up. But you got to get people in that particular area. And the only way you're going to get them comfortable in that area is to underwrite their mistakes and allow them to make mistakes as opportunities to learn. It's just one of those lessons you learn.
Good question, Alan Brown. Two other ones real quick. From John Metz. President Caslen, thanks for taking time to be with us today. Question about the direction of the university. Aside from beating those Tigers, and I would say outside of COVID, what is the number one issue that you hope to address and change to advance USC?
Well, that's a great question. So we are just in the process of finishing up a strategic plan, and a very important strategic plan. It's got a vision statement, mission statement, 8 strategic priorities. I'm not going to walk it through. We don't have the time. But the important thing here is that we have to thrive in this COVID environment, despite the challenges that we're facing financially and whatever, so that as soon as COVID's over, we don't take 6 months just to try to recover, that we take advantage of the fact that we have not taken our eyes off of the strategic landscape that's out there, the strategic landscape defined by our strategic plan, and that we focus on the opportunities that this crisis has created and pushes us out there. So I'll give you an example of some of the things that we're looking at. So let's say if you look nationwide, there's 15 to 20% of students that are not coming back to higher education, at least for right now. They may come back later, but at least if you look at nationwide enrollment of freshmen and you look nationwide of enrollment for students that would come back, it's right around the 15 to 20%. A lot of people are in that particular area. But so what if those students don't come back? To me, that's the huge cost of higher education that has to be addressed. Is one of the reasons why we had to make this decision as early as we did. But what's important is that they still have a desire for higher education because they wouldn't have come to college in the first place. And even though it's interrupted, is there a way that we can still connect to them or connect with them, even though they would not want a resident model? What if they get involved in some other career or some other work or something like that, or they find themselves now in a relationship that they plant roots in, and that the 4-year resident model where they would come on campus for 4 years no longer is applicable to them. Can we find them? Can we connect with them? They still have a desire for higher education, and can we deliver higher education to them in another capacity other than a resident model? That is an increasing opportunity that we must be able to recognize and take advantage of. In our online programs that we have all done to everybody this spring semester give us a great leap ability to be able to connect with some of those people out there. There are 50,000 students in the state of South Carolina who at one time were college students that did not get their degree. And now they're what we call non-standard students. But you have to assume that most of them still have a desire to get their degree. So how can we connect with them, and how can we deliver education to them so that they can achieve their overall goal of higher education, get a degree, and for us to be able to deliver that? These are strategic opportunities in the midst of this crisis that we still must be able to recognize, and going back to agility, and have the intellectual agility to be able to recognize that and move to that direction. If we take 6 months to recover from this virus because of the significant impact to our institution, we're going to lose. We can't afford to do that. So we have to be strategically minded, and we have to have the agility to get there as soon as the opportunity presents itself.
And that is much an economic development issue as anything else. So thank you for that. Last question from Henry, our chair of Leadership Columbia Alumni Association. President Caslen, thank you so much for your service to our country. With your military experience, how are you partnering with Fort Jackson? And I'd throw in Augusta as well.
Well, we want to improve our partnership with them. And in my opinion, it's not nowhere near as it should be. I'm a product of a graduate degree when I was at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and it was a partnership that Fort Leavenworth, Kansas had with Kansas State. And Kansas State went out of their way to deliver education while we were students at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And it was a 2-year partnership. I won't go into the details, but these are the things that we got to be able to do. There are many service members in the service installations across the state of South Carolina, to include Augusta and Georgia, that have men and women and spouses and family members who desire higher education. And we have to find ways to be able to deliver that education to them. Augusta at Fort Jackson, Fort Gordon has a unique situation, because Fort Gordon is the center for the Cyber Institute. There's 3 major cyber commands there. And from an economic standpoint, we want to partner with the cyber commands for not only research opportunities, but for economic development opportunities that are growing in huge numbers around the whole cyber and cybersecurity institutions that are centered right there at Fort Gordon. For example, the state of Georgia has stood up the Georgia Cyber Institute, and that we are in the process of working with Governor McMaster to stand up a South Carolina Cyber Institute that we, the University of South Carolina, will stand up in partnership with the state government, so that we can look towards the economic development of cyber and cybersecurity in support of businesses and public entities within the state of South Carolina. So this is one of the things that's one of the partnerships outside of education, delivering education. This is one of the economic partnerships that we want to develop at Fort Gordon, and we're in the process of working that right now.
Great. That's a good way to wrap up on that. President Caslen, thank you very much. Again, to everybody that's been on, thank you for joining us today. Thanks to Wells Fargo for sponsoring today's summit. President Caslen, we appreciate your insights. I've got lots of comments today from people most appreciative of your time and the message. And again, we will have the presentation on our website later on this afternoon. But we appreciate you and everything you're doing for us at the university. So thank you for your time. Guys, thank you to Leadership Columbia Alumni for all that you do. Y'all have a great day. We'll be back in touch soon. Take care. Thank you, President.
All right, Carl, thanks. Go Cops,
Yes,
be
sir.
Clemson. Thank you.